very heart of the Mad Mage's dungeon. This is where you'll find some of the classic tropes of dungeon design. You'll find the major group on the level guarding the various entrances to the deeper levels. You'll find a host of creatures whose only purpose is to kill or be killed. You'll... Something out there in the dark. No. This is where it all begins. Finding the secrets of the Mad Mage. There's something out there. Oh my God! Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping one and all homebrew their own D&D campaign. So today I'm going to finish my series on the first level dungeon of the Mad Mage, and this is the area that I call the heart of the dungeon. You know, I say that because it contains some of the classic dungeon design practices that were common in the heyday of the multi-level mega dungeon. These includes the rewards versus the risks of exploring an entire level, how you arrange the access to deeper levels, where you put the number one opponent of a level, and how they might control access to other levels or key points in the dungeon, creating a dynamic dungeon versus a static one, and finally having resource draining monsters in your dungeon. So in classic, D&D dungeon design and exploration, players would always try to explore every possible inch of a dungeon's level. Why? Well, because there were often key bits of information or items that were key to deeper levels, whether it was, access to certain secret areas, access to another level, means to defeat monsters, or, solve some puzzle. And this meant not merely mapping out an entire dungeon, but also checking for secret doors and hidden chambers. And so this meant basically encountering every possible monster and trap or obstacle in that dungeon in order to map it out completely. And in those days, experience was based on the monsters that you encountered and defeated, so it was in the player's interest to meet as many of them as they could before going to the lower levels. Now, what happened here was that those dungeons began to feel a little like those old adventure PC games that you used to have in the 80s and 90s, where, you had to search through some area and find all sorts of items, or you would be stopped in place. And oftentimes, if players couldn't find some item, couldn't solve some puzzle, they got frustrated. And this began to feel kind of hokey and contrived. So what replaced this was kind of a simple reward system where you would just sprinkle out, treasure and magic throughout a level, and then, reel the players in, getting them to explore the entire dungeon because all players are essentially greedy. And we see this, more modern style in the, level 1 dungeon of the Mad Mage, where you can see that the treasure and magic items are spread out pretty evenly throughout the dungeon. And even though you do have seed items that are relevant to, NPCs and encounters in later levels, these are not essential to either traveling to these lower levels or to solving some issue in the dungeon. So I would recommend in your own dungeon design to use this method of, spread the magic items out. You can have some seed items, you can have some, things that will unlock something or give players a clue as to how to figure out a puzzle. But it doesn't necessarily have to be totally essential. They're not stopped in their tracks. Now, there's another related aspect to the idea that players would want to explore every inch of a dungeon, and that's that they're always looking for, entrances and exits, either to lower levels, the immediate one lower, or perhaps, some elevator or some gate or something to even lower levels, to save time in terms of exploration. And of course, in the mega dungeon era, we took advantage of this in a way. Oftentimes we would design dungeons where the entrance would be in one corner of a quite large dungeon and the exit would be in the other corner, so that the players had to cross through the entire dungeon. And another thing is sometimes people would build dungeons where you actually had to work your way basically across the entire dungeon in order to find this exit. So basically, these drawing strategies were designed to force players to encounter virtually everything in your dungeon. And like the mega dungeons of the past, this sort of drawing style went out of fashion a long time ago for a number of reasons. You went to smaller dungeons, 1 or 2 levels. You had, a dungeon under a keep or a temple or a tomb, that kind of thing. The idea was you could do this in 1 or 2 sessions. But, even when we did design a larger, multi-level dungeon, we realized that it wasn't good to force the players to be crisscrossing the levels, especially when they went up in level, they wanted to get down to the lower ones. You needed to put in gates or elevators or some kind of means for them to travel quickly to these lower levels. And, it didn't make sense for powerful creatures to live on the lower levels without some means of escape. And we see this new reality in dungeon design if we examine the level 1 of the Mad Mage's dungeon. In theory, it would take the players only 12 turns to reach this gate in room 26D, and only 15 turns to make their way to these stairs down here. I say in theory because, of course, there's always a chance of running into wandering monsters or the major group of Bugbear Goblins that are going to block their access in Area 39. But also this gate in 26D is only accessible by players to the 11th level. Why? Because it takes players to the 10th level dungeon, and Hallister's arch enemy, Jazira Kesselharp, has put this restriction on this gate to protect adventurers, and can only be broken with a wish. And in addition, Hallister has this entire dungeon magically enchanted such that you can't use any sort of teleportation magic to travel up and down or, in or out. Save again another wish. All of this is based on a classic, Gygaxian Arneson game mechanic, which is that the deeper you go into a dungeon, the more deadly it becomes. And there's some logical flaws in this concept, which I've discussed in earlier videos. And as I pointed out with the gates and elevators, it only makes sense if very powerful creatures in lower levels do have some means of getting out very quickly. So hence the usage of gates, and this is why this gate, the designers did limit it to, 11th level characters. And we see with gates, as you go further down into the dungeon, have these similar sort of restrictions. And this gate and a lot of others also have the Elder Runes, which I've discussed in an earlier video, which also makes using them somewhat problematic. But back to the beginning thing, it isn't like the stairs are totally, at the opposite end of the dungeon each time you come down. It is conceivable to go down multiple levels fairly easily. All right, so as I said, in order to access the second level using the stairs, the players are going to have to confront the major power group on this level, which is the Bugbear Goblin group controlled by Xanathar, who are out to take control of this level. There's also the Undertakers, this group of bandits, but I feel like the Bugbear Goblins are the major group, if only they have this global reach. There are other representatives of Xanathar on the second level, third level as you go down. There are connections to Skullport and whatnot in lower levels. So how the players confront the Bugbear Goblin group depends on the route they take. If they go straight down here through Area 25, they will avoid the group in Area 23, which consists of 4 bugbears and 15 goblins. But it does mean they're going to have to confront the group in Area 39 and probably Area 28. In 39, you have 3 bugbears, 19 goblins, and 2 Etten. And in Area 28, you have 2 bugbears and 6 goblins. And the reason you may have to confront both, or possibly in a pitched battle, even have the bugbears from Area 23 come down here, is the major wrinkle of this group. You have 5 intellect devourers under the command of Xanathar who have taken over 5 of the bugbears. Now, it's never really explained how Xanathar communicates with these bugbears with the intellect devourers in them to give them instructions. Their telepathy only goes 60 feet. And if you look at his stats in the Dragon Heist module, he doesn't seem to have any kind of communication spells or traits or items. Now, there are connecting tunnels to Skullport on the level 3 of the dungeon. He has some outposts on level 2. So I assume that he has people going up and down to level 1 to convey these instructions. But the point here is, and it's an idea that you should integrate into your own dungeon design, is when you have creatures who are under the service of a much more powerful creature, this is going to change their behavior from the usual things that players expect. So for me, Bugbears and Goblins means a fight or, somebody runs away. But the text also suggests there could be some negotiation because the Bugbears are interested in taking control of the area with the Undertakers and the Undertakers, but they're afraid one of the Undertakers has a flesh golem, so they may say to the players, why don't you go up there and do this? And this is kind of unusual behavior for your typical Bugbear. And of course, the other option is if the players just attack the Bugbears and Goblins and they kill one of the Bugbears, suddenly they've got an intellect devourer that appears 5 feet from the dead Bugbear. Now, you don't want your players to metagame, but here's the thing. The minute they see an intellect devourer, they are going to want to get rid of that thing or get out of its way as quickly as possible. Because the thing is, any creature with a brain can, in theory, have it devoured magically by the intellect devourer and taken over. And once that brain is devoured, you need to regenerate, a reincarnate, a wish, this kind of thing to bring it back. Now, in theory, the intellect devourer can just use its body thief ability against any creature which is incapacitated. But typically in a battle situation, what's going to happen is they are going to use this ability where they do the psychic blast, where you have to make a DC 12 intelligence save. And then if they do that, then they do the psychic blast. Then you roll 3d6. This is a super doom roll because if it is more than the victim's intelligence, their intelligence goes to 0. So then on the next turn, in theory, the intellect devourer can get within 10 feet and can do the body thief action, which is, a contested intelligence check. So for a normal incapacitated creature, whatever its intelligence is, but if your intelligence is 0, you're going to lose that check. So they have the potential to be a screw job monster. Again, it's a little involved with the different steps there, but again, players, if they know anything about intellect devourers, they're going to be scared. And that is what makes them the major villain of this level. All right, so when you're designing your dungeon and when you are, running it with the players, you always want to make it feel like it's a dynamic place. It's operating in real time. Not static where you just put these monsters there and they're all sitting there waiting for the players. And you have a host of dynamic dungeon examples on this first level of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So in Area 36, a series of 3 rooms, you have a whole bunch of Gricks who are said to, feed on, the Bugbear Goblins and provide food for them. But you also have this little 10 by 10 foot closet. And inside is this human thief named Keelam, who is hiding from the Gricks. He wandered away from his party, and now he's afraid if he comes out of the closet, there's 5 Gricks in this area, they're going to kill him. But the players come along, presumably they kill the Gricks, and they free Keelam, and in his gratitude, he gives them this spell book. And it's very nice. It's got a host of 1st through 3rd level spells. So this Grick area is not a resource drain because it has a nice treasure. And you have another dynamic dungeon encounter in room 37. You have this pit here where there is another member of Keelam's group. So Haleth is a half-elf cleric who was killed by the other members of this group and tossed into the pit. His body then became a revenant. Now, it doesn't really explain how this happened in the book, but like all revenants, he wants revenge on those that killed him. So in theory, he can lead the players through this revenant ability to find the group on level 2. So these are classic encounters that are created by a dynamic sense that there are NPCs and creatures moving through this dungeon in real time, in time just before the players got there and just after. Keelam was only there for 2 days. He would have starved to death. The Revenant was there within maybe 2 or 3 days. The group has now moved on beyond him. And you want to create these sort of encounters in your dungeons to create realism. What you want to avoid are static encounters. These are situations that don't hold up against the logic of a dynamic dungeon. So I already pointed out in an earlier video the illogic of the Undertakers posing as vampires. If they do this over any kind of period of time, either characters are going to come down and try to wipe them out, or they're going to discover their, subterfuge or whatever. They're just not going to last very long. So if you're going to do this, I think it has to be something very recent that they've started. But you also have a static dungeon bit of illogic in the geography of the dungeon in Area 28. You have 2 secret doors that, according to the text, are unknown by any of the bugbears, goblins, or intellect devourers. And these doors provide the only access to areas 30 and 32, along with rooms 33, 34, and 35. And this tunnel in the back here, 29, which is where one of Hallister's scrying eyes appears to observe the players and let them know he's watching us. So this lack of knowledge is a little confusing because, the intellect devourers have intelligence of 10, wisdom of 12. You'd think over time they might detect these secret doors. But even more confusing is there's a pair of were-rats behind the secret doors who are actively working for Xanathar. One is in room 32 and the other is in room 35. So they know about the secret doors and use it, but the intellect devourers don't. So to me, this is a classic static dungeon mistake. The Bugbear Goblins / intellect devourers don't know about the secret doors because the designers don't want them to. It really doesn't hold up when you think about these creatures being here for any extended amount of time. All right, and finally we have some classic resource drains on this level. And simply defined, a resource drain is, often but not always a dead-end room where the players encounter a monster that is, that they have to fight and there's little or no treasure. So we have a gelatinous cube in room 26C, a group of 20 sturges in room 41, a crazed air elemental that attacks anyone that enters the zigzag hall in area 30, a mimic in room 40, and the aforementioned were-rats who are in area 32 and room 35. Now the threat of each of these resource drain encounters varies. So the sturges, by virtue of there's 20 of them, they can do some damage. The gelatinous cube, if the players come around and it's surprised, they can be nasty. Air elementals, that whirlwind attack can do some nasty damage, hurling them against walls. The mimic can do some damage with whoever it, has its adhesive to with its acid. And of course, were-rats, there's a bunch of them, and there's always a threat of lycanthropy. And in each case, the players are forced to use spells either to attack or to heal up, hit points that are taken. And while resource drain encounters are a classic part of D&D, I know there are GMs and players that think they are time wasters. Every monster should have a purpose or some link to a storyline. And I go back and forth on this. When the battles became much more time consuming in version 3.5, I started dropping off the resource drain monsters just because I didn't want to spend an hour on some battle that didn't really mean anything. But I think with the streamlining of version 5, you can have some battles. You can have some classic resource drains. As long as you set them up so that maybe if there's a lot of them, there's some kind of method the players can use. Or maybe, again, it's just one, that seems to be the style in D&D where it doesn't take so long. So there you have the conclusion to my series on the level 1 dungeon of the Mad Mage. I have to say it's been extremely interesting to delve in this deeply to this first part of this module. I hope it's been, interesting to the faithful viewers of my channel, but also any new viewers who've come along. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have more. For any and all, please leave some comments. I love to hear them. But most importantly, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.